1945. Japanese military nurses hiding in Okinawan caves chose suicide grenades over American capture. They'd been taught the enemy were savage demons who would torture and defile them. But when you soldiers found them, something happened that shattered everything they'd been told. The Americans treated their wounds, served them ice cream, and showed them a respect they'd never known. Some even showed romantic interest. What could be so shocking about enemy soldiers treating women with dignity that it completely destroyed these prisoners' entire understanding of the war? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In the spring of 1945, Japan was losing the war. The cities burned from American bombs. Food was so scarce that families ate rice mixed with sawdust to fill their stomachs. Children went to bed hungry every night. The government told everyone that America wanted to destroy Japan completely. They said American soldiers were monsters who would kill every Japanese person they found. Emperor Hirohito ruled Japan like a god. Nobody questioned him. Nobody dared. The military controlled everything. They taught that dying for Japan was the greatest honor. Living in defeat was the worst shame a person could experience. This shame, called haji, was worse than death itself. Schools taught children to fear capture more than anything else. Better to die than to surrender. Women in Japan had no power. They could not vote. They could not own property. They served their fathers, then their husbands, then their sons. The military told women that if enemy soldiers captured them, terrible things would happen. The propaganda posters showed American soldiers as demons with sharp teeth and evil eyes. Radio broadcasts described how Americans tortured prisoners. Teachers told girls that American men would attack them and leave them to die in pain. Every woman knew what she must do if capture seemed certain. She must kill herself. A grenade. A knife. Jumping from a cliff. Anything was better than falling into American hands. Nurse Kimiko Yamada was 23 years old. She worked at a field hospital on the island of Okinawa. The hospital was really just a cave carved into the rocky hillside. Beds were wooden planks. Medicine was almost gone. Bandages were washed and reused until they fell apart. Kimiko and the other nurses worked 18 hours each day caring for wounded soldiers. Many soldiers died because there was no medicine to save them. The nurses whispered prayers as they watched young men take their last breaths. Kimiko had joined the military nursing corps 2 years earlier. Her family was proud. Serving the emperor was the highest calling. She learned to give injections, clean wounds, and assist in surgery. She also learned what to do if Americans came. Her commanding officer gave each nurse a small hand grenade. "Keep it with you always," he said. "If the Americans break through our lines, you know what to do." Kimiko kept the grenade in her apron pocket. Its weight reminded her of her duty every moment. The other nurses felt the same fear. There was Sakiko, who was only 19. There was Hana, who had 3 younger brothers fighting somewhere in the Pacific. There was old nurse Reiko, who was 40 and had trained all the younger women. They worked together in the dark cave, hearing the boom of American artillery getting closer each day. They saw the fear in the wounded soldiers' eyes. Some soldiers begged the nurses to kill them before the Americans arrived. They did not want to be captured alive. In late June, the American forces pushed closer to their cave hospital. The sound of gunfire echoed off the stone walls. Explosions shook dust from the ceiling. The commanding officer gathered all the nurses. "The Americans will be here soon," he said. "Remember your training. Remember your duty to the emperor. Do not allow yourselves to be taken alive. The Americans will do unspeakable things to you. Death is better. Death is honorable." The nurses bowed their heads. Kimiko felt the grenade in her pocket grow heavier. The next morning, American voices echoed outside the cave entrance. Rough English words that none of the nurses understood. The few remaining Japanese soldiers fired their rifles until they ran out of bullets. Then silence. Kimiko and 6 other nurses huddled in the deepest part of the cave. Their hands shook. Sachiko was crying quietly. Hana pulled out her grenade and stared at it. This is the moment, Kimiko thought. This is when we die with honor. She reached for her own grenade. American soldiers appeared at the cave entrance. Their helmets and rifles were silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. Kimiko closed her eyes and pulled the grenade pin. But her hands were shaking so badly that she dropped it. The grenade rolled across the cave floor and did not explode. It was a dud. Defective. She stared at it in horror and confusion. Sachiko tried to detonate hers. Nothing happened. The grenades they had been given were broken or too old to work. The American soldiers walked slowly into the cave. They carried rifles but pointed them at the ground. They raised their hands to show they were not attacking. One soldier said something in English. His voice was soft. Not angry. Not violent. Just calm. Another soldier pulled out a canteen of water and held it toward the nurses. A third soldier took off his helmet. He had red hair and freckles. He looked young, maybe younger than Kimiko. He smiled and made a gesture like drinking water. Kimiko could not understand what was happening. Where was the violence? Where were the demons the propaganda had promised? These soldiers looked like regular men. Tired men. Dirty men. But not monsters. One soldier knelt down and slowly placed his rifle on the ground. He pulled out a white cloth and waved it gently. He pointed to a wounded nurse lying against the cave wall. He made a gesture like bandaging an arm. Another American appeared. This one had a red cross on his helmet. A medic. He carried a large bag. He approached the wounded nurse carefully, speaking in that same soft tone. When none of the nurses attacked him, he opened his bag and took out clean white bandages, bottles of medicine, and metal tools that gleamed even in the dim cave light. He began cleaning the wounded nurse's infected arm. His hands were gentle. His face showed concern, not cruelty. Kimiko watched in stunned silence. Everything she had been taught was wrong. The Americans were helping them, treating their wounds, offering water, being kind. A terrible thought entered her mind, one that she could barely acknowledge. If they lied about this, she thought, what else did they lie about? The question terrified her more than any grenade ever could. The American soldiers loaded the nurses onto trucks. Kimiko sat on a wooden bench in the back of the truck, squeezed between Sachiko and Hana. The truck rumbled down a dirt road. None of the nurses spoke. They were too afraid and too confused. Every bump in the road made Kimiko's heart jump. She kept waiting for something terrible to happen. But the American soldiers just drove. One of them offered the nurses cigarettes. The women shook their heads no. The soldier shrugged and put the cigarettes away. He did not seem angry that they refused. After 2 hours, the truck stopped at a large fenced area near the coast. Kimiko could see the ocean sparkling in the afternoon sun. Inside the fence were rows of white tents arranged in perfect straight lines. American flags flapped in the breeze. Soldiers walked between the tents carrying boxes and equipment. Everything looked organized and clean. This was the prisoner of war camp. The nurses climbed down from the trucks. Their legs were stiff and sore. An American woman in a clean uniform approached them. She wore a white cap with a red cross on it. She was a nurse too. She smiled at the Japanese women and spoke in broken Japanese. She had learned maybe 20 Japanese words. Bath, she said. Food. Sleep. Safe. She gestured for the nurses to follow her. They walked to a large tent. Inside were metal tubs filled with hot water. Real hot water, heated by a machine. Steam rose from the surface. On a table sat bars of white soap that smelled like flowers. Clean towels were folded in neat stacks. The American nurse pointed to the tubs and made washing motions. She left them alone to bathe. Kimiko had not had a real bath in 6 months. In the cave hospital, they washed with cold water from a bucket when they could. The hot water felt like a dream. She sank into the tub and felt months of dirt and fear wash away. Sachiko started crying as she bathed. Not sad crying. Something else. Relief maybe. Or confusion. Or both. The soap made bubbles. Kimiko had forgotten that soap could make bubbles. Such a small thing. Such a luxury. After bathing, the women were given clean clothes. Not prisoner uniforms like they expected. Simple cotton dresses in different colors. Blue, green, yellow. The fabric was soft and smelled like soap. There were no holes or patches. Kimiko ran her fingers over the smooth material. In Japan, everyone's clothes were patched and mended 100 times. New fabric did not exist anymore. Everything went to the military. But here, prisoners got new dresses. Then came dinner. The American nurse led them to a large tent with long tables and benches. This was the dining hall. Kimiko walked inside and stopped so suddenly that Hana bumped into her from behind. The smell of food was overwhelming. Real food, cooked meat. Fresh bread, vegetables. Her stomach cramped with sudden hunger. American soldiers in white aprons stood behind a long counter. They held large spoons and scooped food onto metal trays. The Japanese nurses stood in line like everyone else. When Kimiko reached the counter, a soldier smiled at her and piled food onto her tray. White rice. So much white rice. More rice than her family had seen in a month. Next to the rice was a thick slice of meat in brown gravy. Then green beans. Then a roll of soft bread with a pat of butter. Then a cup of milk. Cold milk in a glass bottle. And on a small plate, a slice of cake with white frosting. Kimiko carried her tray to a table and sat down. She stared at the food. This could not be real. This was more food than a Japanese officer received. And they were giving it to prisoners. Enemy prisoners. Women who had been trying to kill American soldiers just hours ago. It made no sense. Around her, the other nurses ate slowly, almost afraid the food would disappear if they moved too fast. Old Nurse Reiko had tears running down her face as she chewed the bread. The next shock came 3 days later. It was a hot afternoon. The nurses sat in the shade of their tent, trying to stay cool. They had been given work assignments. Light work. Washing dishes in the kitchen. Folding laundry. Nothing hard. Nothing cruel. They worked 4 hours each day and spent the rest of the time resting. This also made no sense. In Japan, prisoners worked until they collapsed. Everyone knew that. But American prisoners here worked gentle shifts and then rested. A truck drove up to the camp gates. It was painted red and white. Words on the side said Coca-Cola in English letters. American soldiers cheered when they saw the truck. 2 men jumped out and opened the back. Inside were wooden crates filled with glass bottles. The men used a metal opener to pop the caps off the bottles. Fizzing sounds filled the air. Brown liquid bubbled up and dripped down the sides of the bottles. One American soldier walked over to where the Japanese nurses sat. He carried 6 bottles of Coca-Cola. He handed one to each woman and used gestures to show them how to drink it. Kimiko took the cold bottle. She had never seen anything like it. The glass was wet with condensation. She lifted it to her lips and took a small sip. Sweet, fizzy, cold. The bubbles tickled her nose. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. Sachiko laughed. Actually, I laughed. It was the first time Kimiko had heard laughter since the battle began. The American soldier grinned when he heard the laugh. He seemed happy that they liked his gift. He said something in English and pointed to himself. Then he pointed to them and made a drinking motion. Kimiko understood. He was saying he was glad they enjoyed it. Such a simple kindness. Such a strange war. More strange things followed. An American officer came to the tent one evening. He brought a young Japanese-American man with him. This man spoke perfect Japanese. He was a translator. The officer asked if any of the nurses spoke English. None did. He asked if they would like to learn. Several women nodded yes. The officer smiled and said classes would start next week. They would teach English to any prisoner who wanted to learn. Again, Kimiko felt confused. Why teach your enemies your language? What kind of captors were these? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the strangest thing was how the American soldiers looked at them. Not with hate. Not with disgust. With something else. Interest. Curiosity. Several soldiers tried to talk to the nurses even though neither group spoke the other's language. One young soldier with dark hair pointed to Kimiko's face and said a word in English. Pretty. She did not know what it meant, but his tone was soft. His eyes were kind. Another soldier showed the nurses a photograph of his mother and sister back in America. He pointed to his sister and then to Sakiko, making a gesture that they looked similar. He seemed pleased by this. One afternoon, a soldier brought flowers he had picked from outside the camp fence. Bright red flowers with yellow centers. He offered them to Hana with a shy smile. Hana took them, confused. In Japan, men did not give women flowers unless they were courting them. Was this American trying to court her? It seemed impossible. They were enemies. She was a prisoner. But he acted like a nervous boy trying to impress a girl. He even bowed badly, trying to copy the Japanese custom. Hana giggled despite herself. The nurses talked about this late at night in their tent. They whispered so no one would hear. Sachiko said she thought the Americans saw them as women, not just as enemies. Reiko said this was very different from what they had been told. The propaganda had promised violence and cruelty. Instead, they found respect, even attraction. Young men treating them like young women, offering gifts, trying to communicate, being gentle. One night, Kimiko lay on her cot and thought about everything. The hot baths, the abundant food, the cold Coca-Cola that arrived in trucks, the flowers, the kind eyes, the respect. She thought about the cave hospital where men died because there was no medicine. She thought about her family in Tokyo eating sawdust mixed with rice. She thought about the grenades that did not work and wondered if perhaps they were meant not to work. Maybe someone in the factory had made them wrong on purpose. Maybe that person knew the truth. A terrible question formed in her mind. If America had so much that it could give prisoners ice-cold soda and cake and hot baths and new clothes, what else did it have? How big was this country? How wealthy were its people? Japan had told everyone that America was weak and soft and easy to defeat. But you could not fake the industrial machine she saw here. The trucks, the tents, the endless supplies arriving every day, the organization, the efficiency. This was not a weak nation. This was a powerful nation that was so rich it could afford to treat its enemies with abundance. And if they lied about American weakness, what else was a lie? The question kept Kimiko awake long into the night. Outside the tent, American guards walked their patrols. Inside, Japanese nurses slept on clean mattresses with full stomachs. Everything was backwards. Everything was wrong. Or maybe, Kimiko thought with growing dread, everything she had believed before was wrong. Maybe this was right. Maybe kindness was not weakness. Maybe abundance was real strength. Maybe the war was already over and Japan had lost before it even began. She touched the soft cotton of her dress. She remembered the taste of Coca-Cola. She thought about the soldier who had called her pretty, seeing her as a person, as a woman, not as a thing to destroy. The contrast between what she had been taught and what she was experiencing grew sharper every day. Soon, she knew she would have to choose what to believe. The propaganda of her past or the reality of her present. The choice terrified her. November arrived and the weather turned cooler. Kimiko had been in the camp for 4 months now. She worked in the kitchen helping prepare meals. The American cooks taught her how to use their giant industrial ovens and enormous metal pots. Everything in the kitchen was so big. One pot could hold enough soup for 200 people. Back home in Japan, her mother's largest pot fed maybe 8 people. The scale of everything amazed her. America did not do things small. It did things huge. The work was not hard. She chopped vegetables for 3 hours each morning and washed dishes for 2 hours in the afternoon. The rest of the day was hers. She attended English classes 3 times a week. The teacher was a patient man named Mr. Wilson who spoke slowly and repeated words until the students understood. Kimiko could now say simple things in English. Hello, thank you, please, good morning. The words felt strange in her mouth, but she practiced them every night. One morning, the camp commander made an announcement. Next week was an American holiday called Thanksgiving. All prisoners would be invited to join the celebration and share a special meal. The translator explained that Thanksgiving was a day when Americans gave thanks for good things in their lives. Families gathered together and ate a large feast. It was one of the most important holidays in America. Kimiko did not understand why prisoners would be invited to an American holiday. Prisoners were enemies. You did not celebrate with enemies. But by now she had learned that Americans did many things that made no sense to her. They treated prisoners like guests. They gave them new clothes and good food. They taught them English for free. They acted like the war was already over and everyone was friends. Maybe in America this was normal. Maybe Americans were just strange people who did not understand how war was supposed to work. The days before Thanksgiving were busy in the kitchen. The American cooks prepared for the feast. They brought in 20 whole turkeys, each bird weighing 15 or 20 pounds. They made huge bowls of mashed potatoes using 100 pounds of potatoes. They baked 30 pumpkin pies. They cooked 50 pounds of green beans. The amounts were insane. Kimiko had never seen so much food being prepared at one time. This was food for an army. No, it was food for an army and its prisoners. Together, Thanksgiving Day arrived with clear blue skies. The Americans set up long tables outside in neat rows. They covered the tables with white paper and set out plates and silverware. Everything was clean and organized. At noon, the prisoners and soldiers lined up together at the serving tables. There was no separation. No prisoner line and soldier line. Everyone was equal. Kimiko took a plate and walked down the serving line. An American soldier carved thick slices of turkey and placed 2 slices on her plate. The meat was juicy and steam rose from it. Next came a huge scoop of mashed potatoes with melted butter pooled in the center. Then stuffing made with bread and herbs. Then cranberry sauce, bright red and sweet. Then green beans with pieces of bacon. Then a soft dinner roll with more butter. Then a slice of pumpkin pie topped with whipped cream. Her plate was so full, she worried the food would slide off the edges. She sat at a table with the other Japanese nurses. American soldiers sat at the same table. Everyone ate together. One soldier tried to explain in broken Japanese what each food was called: turkey, potatoes, pie. The nurses repeated the English words. The Americans smiled when the Japanese women said the words correctly. It felt like a language game, like children playing together and laughing at mistakes. Before the meal, The camp chaplain stood up to speak. The translator repeated his words in Japanese. The chaplain said they were thankful for many things. Thankful that the war was ending. Thankful that people on both sides would soon go home to their families. Thankful for peace among all nations. Thankful that former enemies could sit together and share a meal as human beings. He asked everyone to bow their heads for a moment of silence. Kimiko bowed her head. Her throat felt tight. Her eyes burned with tears. She did not want to cry. When she looked up, she saw old Nurse Riko weeping openly. Tears ran down the old woman's wrinkled face and dripped onto her plate. Sachiko reached over and held Riko's hand. Reiko spoke in a shaking voice. In our hospital, she said, we gave prisoners one handful of rice and called it mercy. We let wounded enemy soldiers die without medicine. We thought this was proper. This was war. But this, she gestured at the overflowing plates, this is something else. This is something I do not have words for, Kimiko understood. The kindness was almost cruel because it revealed the truth. Japan had been savage to its prisoners. America was generous to its prisoners. Japan had been told it was the superior nation. But superior nations did not starve their enemies. Superior nations did not fear showing abundance. The feast was not just food. It was a message. It said that America was so powerful, so wealthy, so confident that it could afford to feed its enemies the same meal its own soldiers ate. That was true strength. Not cruelty. Not domination. Strength through abundance. After Thanksgiving, something shifted inside Kimiko. The wall that separated what she had been taught from what she was experiencing finally crumbled. She stopped trying to make sense of the contradiction. She accepted that everything she had believed was a lie. Japan had lied about America. Japan had lied about the war. Japan had lied about what honor meant. The truth was here in the camp. In the hot showers and the cold Coca-Cola. In the soft dresses and the English lessons. In the turkey dinner shared between enemies. In the flowers given by shy soldiers who saw Japanese women as women, not as things to hate. Her new work assignment made the truth even clearer. The Americans needed people who spoke Japanese to help teach their intelligence officers. Kimiko and 3 other nurses were chosen for this job. They were taken to a classroom building and given desks and chairs. They were given teaching materials and Japanese books. An American officer explained through the translator that they would be paid for this work. Paid, with camp scrip. They could use it to buy small items from the camp store. Candy, soap, writing a paper. They were prisoners, but they were being treated like professional teachers and paid for their knowledge. The intelligence officers were polite young men who wanted to learn Japanese language and culture. They asked questions about Japanese customs, about food, about holidays, about daily life. They did not ask about military secrets. They just wanted to understand Japan as a place where people lived normal lives. One officer showed Kimiko a map of Japan and asked her to point to her hometown. She pointed to Tokyo. He nodded and said his grandmother came from Germany. He said he wanted to visit Tokyo someday after the war and see the temples and gardens. He spoke like visiting Japan was a normal thing. Like the war would end and countries would be friends again. In the classroom, there was a shelf of Japanese newspapers. These newspapers came from neutral countries and told the truth about the war. Kimiko read them during her lunch break. She learned that Japan had lost almost every major battle. That Japanese cities were being bombed into rubble. That millions of Japanese people had died. That the emperor's advisors knew the war was lost but kept fighting anyway. The newspapers showed photographs of American factories producing thousands of planes and ships. Rows and rows of bombers stretching to the horizon. Assembly lines making tanks as fast as automobiles. The industrial power was unbelievable. One afternoon, the Americans showed educational films to the prisoners. The films were in English with a Japanese translator speaking over them. One film showed American cities: New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. Buildings so tall they seemed to touch the sky. Streets filled with cars and buses. Stores with windows full of goods. People of different colors and backgrounds walking together. The film showed American families in their homes. They had electric refrigerators full of food, electric washing machines for clothes, telephones in every house. The wealth was stunning. This was not a nation struggling to survive. This was a nation where ordinary people lived better than Japanese nobles. Another film showed how America was organized. It explained the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It described how the government had three parts that balanced each other. How citizens could vote for their leaders. How laws protected people's freedom. How even prisoners of war had rights under something called the Geneva Convention. Rights. The word was strange to Kimiko. In Japan you have duties. Duty to the emperor. Duty to your family. Duty to die with honor. But right. The idea that even prisoners had legal protection was foreign to everything she knew. She thought about the Japanese military code. The code said that soldiers must never surrender. Death before dishonor. Capture meant eternal shame. But the American code said that life had value. That even enemies deserved to be treated with dignity. That defeat did not equal worthlessness. The contrast was complete and total. One system said humans were tools to be used and thrown away. The other system said humans had worth simply because they were human. That night, Kimiko wrote in a small notebook the Americans had given her. She wrote in Japanese, knowing no one but she would read it. She wrote that kindness was the cruelest weapon because it destroyed everything she believed. She wrote that being fed and clothed and respected by her enemies hurt more than being hated would have. She wrote that she now understood Japan had not lost to American cruelty. Japan had lost to American abundance. To a nation so wealthy it could build 1,000 bombers while still making sure every family had a refrigerator. To a nation so confident it treated prisoners like guests. She wrote about the soldiers who brought flowers and tried to learn Japanese words and showed photographs of their families. They did not see Japanese prisoners as conquered enemies. They saw women who spoke a different language and came from a different place. They saw people. The attraction the soldiers showed was not about conquest. It was about normal human interest between young men and young women. It was about curiosity and respect. Some of the nurses had formed careful friendships with soldiers. They practiced English together. They laughed at misunderstandings. They shared stories about their homes. It was strange and confusing, but also somehow beautiful. Kimiko closed her notebook and lay on her cot. Outside, guards walked their patrols. Inside, Japanese prisoners slept safely with full stomachs. She thought about what Japan must become after the war ended. Japan would have to change everything. The way it treated people. The way it made decisions. The way it understood power and dignity. Japan would have to learn that true strength came not from forcing people to die, but from building a society where people wanted to live. America had taught her this lesson without saying a word. They taught it through hot showers and turkey dinners, and paying prisoners for their work, and treating them like human beings with value. She fell asleep thinking about dignity. Real dignity. Not the false dignity of dying for an emperor who saw you as a tool, but the true dignity of being treated as a person who mattered. America had given her that gift even though she was the enemy. She would carry that gift home to Japan. And somehow she would help her broken country understand what she had learned in captivity. The war ended in August 1945 when Japan surrendered. Kimiko heard the news on the camp radio. The emperor's voice came through the static, telling the Japanese people that the war was over. His voice sounded weak and human, not godlike at all. Some of the nurses wept. Others sat in silence. Kimiko felt empty inside. Everything they had sacrificed was for nothing. All the death, all the suffering, for nothing. The repatriation ships came in the spring of 1946. Kimiko and the other nurses lined up to board a gray military transport vessel. American soldiers helped them carry their small bags up the ramp. One soldier shook Kimiko's hand and said good luck in careful Japanese. She had taught him those words in class. She thanked him in English. The exchange felt sad and strange. They had been enemies. Now they were almost friends. Now they were saying goodbye forever. In her bag, Kimiko carried small treasures from America. A bar of flower-scented soap wrapped in paper. An English-Japanese dictionary given to her by Mr. Wilson. A photograph of herself standing with 3 American soldiers, all of them smiling. A recipe for pumpkin pie written in English that she had copied from the camp cookbook. And chocolate bars, 6 of them, to give to her family. These things seemed so ordinary. But in Japan, they would be miracles. The ship voyage took 2 weeks. The women stood on deck as the ship approached Yokohama harbor. Kimiko saw her homeland for the first time in almost 2 years. Her heart should have leaped with joy. Instead, she felt dread. The coastline was gray and brown. No green. No life. As the ship got closer, she saw the destruction. Buildings reduced to broken concrete and twisted metal. Entire neighborhoods vanished. The city looked like the surface of the moon, cratered and dead. They docked and walked down the ramp onto Japanese soil. The smell hit Kimiko. Immediately, smoke, sewage, rot, and something else. Desperation. People in ragged clothes crowded near the dock, begging for food. Children with hollow eyes and swollen bellies held out their hands. Old women picked through garbage looking for anything to eat. Kimiko clutched her bag closer. Inside were chocolate bars worth more than gold here. The contrast was brutal and complete. She had left American abundance and returned to Japanese starvation. In the camp, she ate 3 full meals every day. Here, people were dying in the streets from hunger. In the camp, she had worn clean dresses and taken hot showers. Here, people wore rags and had no water to wash with. America had won not just the war, but the future itself. A government official processed the returning nurses and gave them train tickets home. Kimiko rode the train to Tokyo through a destroyed landscape. Every city was bombed. Every town was damaged. Rice fields lay empty because there were no men left to farm them. The train car was packed with thin, exhausted people who stared at nothing. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. She arrived at Tokyo Station and walked to her family's neighborhood. Half the houses were gone. But her family's small home still stood, damaged but standing. She knocked on the door. Her mother opened it and screamed. She had thought Kimiko was dead. Her father rushed to the door. Her younger sister. They pulled her inside and held her and cried. They asked 100 questions at once. Where had she been? How did she survive? Why had the military said she was killed in action? Kimiko gave them the chocolate bars. Her mother unwrapped one with shaking hands and broke it into tiny pieces so everyone could have a taste. Her sister, who was now 15, ate her piece slowly, making it last. She said it was the best thing she had ever tasted. Kimiko watched her family savor the chocolate and felt her throat close with emotion. This was what abundance looked like in Japan now. One chocolate bar shared among 5 people was a feast. Her father asked what happened to her. She told them she had been captured by Americans. Her father's face darkened. Her mother looked away. Kimiko understood. The capture was shameful. She was supposed to have died. Instead, she had survived. Worse, she had survived by accepting enemy help. Her father asked if the Americans had hurt her. She said no. She said they had treated her well. Better than well. Her father did not believe her. Nobody could treat prisoners well. That was not how war worked. Over the following weeks, Kimiko struggled to explain her experience. Her family and neighbors looked at her with suspicion. Some whispered that she had collaborated with the enemy. How else could she look so healthy when everyone else was starving? She tried to tell them about the abundance, the food, the medicine, kindness. They thought she was lying or confused. Some said the Americans had brainwashed her. Others said she was making up stories to excuse her survival. Only other returned prisoners understood. Kimiko found a small group of women who had been in different American camps. They met in secret and talked about what they had seen. They all carried the same confusion and guilt. They had been treated better as prisoners than their own people had been treated as citizens. What did that mean about Japan? What did it mean about everything they had been taught? In 1947, things began to change. The American occupation brought new ideas. Women gained the right to vote. A new constitution was written that talked about human rights and democracy. Schools started teaching different values. Some people resisted. They said Japan was losing its soul. But Kimiko saw it differently. Japan was not losing its soul. Japan was looking for a new one. A better one. She became an English teacher at a girls' school. She taught her students American phrases and American ideas. She told them carefully that the world was bigger than Japan, that other nations had different ways of living. That strength came from building, not destroying. Some parents complained that she was too influenced by America. But the school principal supported her. He was a man who had lost 3 sons in the war. He said Japan needed teachers who understood that the old way had failed. Years passed. Japan rebuilt itself. The economy grew. Cities rose from the ashes. The country that had starved became the country that prospered. Kimiko married a Japanese engineer who had spent the war in a factory. They had 2 children. She never told her children the details of her captivity. It was too complicated, too painful. But when her daughter asked why she spoke English so well, Kimiko said she had learned it from kind teachers during the war. That was true enough. In 1995, Kimiko was 73 years old. A university student came to interview her for a research project about women in World War II. The student asked what she remembered most about being a prisoner. Kimiko thought for a long moment. She said that the Americans fed them when they expected death. They showed respect when they expected shame. They treated enemies with dignity that their own military never showed its own soldiers. She told the student that the real lesson was not about American abundance. Plenty of nations were rich. The real lesson was about American belief. The belief that even enemies deserve to be treated like human beings. That honor could exist without cruelty. That strength came not from domination, but from valuing every human life, even your enemy's life. Japan had to lose the war to learn what made a nation truly strong. The student asked if she was bitter about her experience. Kimiko shook her head. She said she was grateful. The men who captured her could have killed her. Instead, they showed her a different way to be strong. They showed her that kindness was not weakness, that respecting your enemy was not defeat, that seeing the humanity in others, even during war, was the highest form of courage. Those lessons helped build the new Japan, the peaceful Japan, the Japan that chose prosperity over conquest. She stood up and walked to her shelf. She pulled out an old photograph. 5 people stood together smiling. 3 American soldiers in uniform. 2 Japanese nurses in clean dresses. Everyone looked young and hopeful. She showed it to the student. These men did not have to be kind to me, she said. But they were. And that small kindness changed everything I believed. It changed how I saw the world. It changed what I taught my children. It changed what I thought was possible. That kindness, she said softly, was the most powerful weapon America had. Not the bombs, not the ships, not the planes. Kindness, because kindness makes you question everything. It makes you realize that your enemies are just people who were told different lies. And once you see that truth, you can never go back to hating. You can only go forward to understanding. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.